In the year 1804, almost 5 years after her resurrection, she appeared in the home of a glassblower in the small town of Windsheim. Whether the exorcist stayed or ran, whether the villagers survived or perished, there are no records, only theories. And that is why, to this very day, the legend persists, whispered around campfires and written on dusty tombstones. For when the dead rise, they bring with them tales that defy our understanding, truths that shatter our reality, mysteries that claw at the very essence of our humanity. He and his wife took her in, not realizing who she was, and named her Maria. For the next decade, she lived among them, working in the fields, tending cows and pigs. She never asked questions, never offered opinions. She would just work. And despite her strange appearance, long fingernails, dirty hair, clothes more suited to a nun than a peasant, the villagers seemed to accept her. In time, the glass blower and his wife grew fond of the girl. Perhaps it was her solemn nature, or the fact that after all, this time, she still hadn't spoken a word. Either way, they kept her. But her peaceful life came to an end when a traveling preacher came to town. A man with a booming voice and an even bigger ego. His name was Johann Joseph and his trade was fear. He spoke of hell and damnation, promising salvation to only a few. And when he looked into the girl's eyes, he saw a lifetime of sin. To him, she was a demon. No girl possessed by Satan would resist his holy words. So he confronted her, and to everyone's surprise, she answered. When she did, her voice echoed with a power that shook the room. "You speak of hell," she said. "Then let me show you." She reached out, her fingers traced paths on his arm, and the preacher screamed. The townspeople gathered, worried. What had they done to incur the devil's wrath? But instead of fire and brimstone, they found a sight both eerie and undeniable. Etched onto the preacher's skin were paths mapless, yet leading straight to the gates of hell, a place no mortal should see. Demonic possession. The townspeople cried. She had confessed, and that same day she was led out of the village away from the church. Towards the forest, they stripped her bare, bound her wrists, tied her ankles, and cast iron shackles around her neck. Then they left her there, alone to starve. They watched as she walked into the woods. They expected a wild animal to tear her apart. They expected her to hang herself with the rope they had left behind. They expected anything but what actually happened. 5 days later, when they returned to find her body, she was gone. The shackles were broken, the rope cut. All that was left was a single feather. The townspeople panicked, realizing they had set the devil free. How could she have escaped? Why hadn't she run away long ago? And most importantly, where was she? Some said she was already in hell. Others claimed she was hiding, gathering strength, but no one knew for sure. And so the hunt began. The locals scoured the area for weeks, searching caves, barns, hollow logs. They even tore down old buildings, convinced she was hiding beneath the floorboards. But she was gone, vanished, until one day when a farmer clearing his barn found a hidden alcove. Inside, lying on some straw, was a pile of clothes, the same clothes they had put on her all those years ago. He picked them up, smelled them, and thought he detected a faint, sweet odor. But when he looked closer, he realized that the clothes were new, the rope still whole, the shackles unbent, the chains untarnished. The villagers gathered, their eyes wide with terror, and just when they were about to break in, 2 men stepped forward. Brothers Franz and Jacob Fner, they had come from a nearby town. They bowed to the villagers. "We are exorcists," they said, "and we have come for the girl who was returned." Without another word, they entered the barn and disappeared inside. The door creaked shut. Moments passed. Then screams filled the air. The brothers emerged, their robes torn, their faces pale. "She is not here," they gasped. "But something worse is." And then the animals began to stir. Rats crawled across the ground, birds screeched from trees, dogs howled in distant yards. Whatever they had woken, it was coming for them. The exorcists fell to their knees. "Where is she?" they cried. "How can we stop it?" But the villagers had no answers. Only stories, stories of a girl who could predict the future. Stories of a girl whose touch brought darkness. Stories of a girl who was not of this world. Now, History tells us nothing of what happened that day. In 1811, the story went. A traveller on the road near the German town of Ulm saw a young woman standing by the roadside. According to the records of the St. George's convent where she would turn up soon after, she was pale as frost, barefoot and mute. Dressed in rags, she was barely human, the merchant said, and her very presence unsettled even his horses. So he took her in, wrapped her in a blanket and left her with the nuns. What happened after that is recorded in faded ink on yellowed pages, telling a tale both horrible and hypnotic, a story that refuses to stay buried. But the sisters refused to bury her. On the fourth night, when the wind howled loud enough to mask all but the shrillest sound, the bell atop her coffin began to tremble, not once but repeatedly, as if someone was pulling it, rhythmically, desperately. He scoured parish records, old trial notes, even asylum logs. But graves, like secrets, don't stay silent forever. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the night is still, a bell rings in the dark and someone remembers her name. He found over a dozen separate accounts spanning nearly a century, all pointing to a pale, mute woman with unnatural resilience. He published a paper titled The Twice Buried, in which he proposed a theory both scientific and grotesque that Margaretha had some rare, neurological condition that slowed her life signs to the point of invisibility. And yet, there was always more: scratches, drawings, the same image repeated over time. A rectangle, a figure inside, arms stretched outward, hands bloodied. Across monasteries, hospitals and private homes where her name was only spoken in fragments, that image appeared on mirrors in dust, carved into wooden floorboards. And always when the bell rang, the bell, the same kind used in the old safety coffin designs of the 18th century, meant to protect the living from being buried alive. But in Margaretha's case, it became a curse, not a signal of hope, but a warning. Yet by the time the priest arrived, the bell was still. He dismissed the sisters' cries as nerves and wind. The casket remained shut, but the next morning they found blood on the underside of the lid, and this time no one dared open it. The crypt was sealed. Immediately, they placed her body in the crypt beneath the chapel, sealed in a lead coffin with chains across the lid, chains forged not just to bind metal. But her story, like smoke, refused to vanish. The grave robbers and bone collectors who scoured the area around the ruined convent whispered of a lead coffin chained shut under a ruined chapel. Some even claimed to have seen a figure wandering forests near Ulm, aged, yes, but unchanged. Her eyes too bright for her face, her hands always hidden beneath long sleeves. But perhaps to bind something more, they welded an iron cross onto the surface, then attached a bell above, with a string leading down into the casket just in case. They called her the Returned. When the sisters at St. George's Convent first laid eyes on her, they fell silent. The archives hold no explanation for this. The convent burned in 1823 under mysterious circumstances. Only the sisters survived, and neither ever spoke again of what they had seen that night. One was committed to an asylum. The other wrote a letter, preserved in brittle ink, which ended with the words, "She is not of our world. She wakes when forgotten." But whatever it was, the silence lasted until she died. Again, no explanation was offered then either. For all we know from the records, she could have been anyone. But that, too, would change. When the convent sisters brought her to the chapel, presumably to lay out her body for burial, they noticed something peculiar about her face. There was no rigor mortis, in fact. She appeared younger than the last time they'd seen her. Her hair had grayed unnaturally, her skin translucent like parchment held to candlelight, her veins visible beneath. They wrote, too, that her nails had strange grooves, as if she had clawed her way through something more than just dirt. Still, she didn't speak. Yet those who looked at her too long felt the uncanny sense of being remembered, of recognition from someone long dead, and her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. And this time, no matter how many times the priest pressed his ear to the leaden coffin, there was no sound but the rasp of his own breathing. He saw no heartbeat, no breath, and though the sisters wept and begged him to wait, the priest knew. He waited anyway. At first, the minutes crawled by, then hours, and finally, days passed and still she did not stir. Terrified, The sisters carried her back to her room. Though she showed no other signs of life, they buried her anyway, sealing her in a lead coffin with chains across the lid. Even then, she didn't stay dead, and each time the convent sisters found her, she was somehow older. One night during Mass, she collapsed again. This time, they waited longer still before bringing her back to the chapel. They say it rang. Years went by. From then on, Margaret the Vos was declared dead a second time. In 1866, a medical historian named Dr. Wilhelm Gerlich began researching cases of premature burial. His interest in Margaretha bordered on obsession. They say her final grave is unknown, that her body was moved, reburied, hidden by those who feared she might rise again. Let me tell you a story about a girl named Margaretha who was buried alive, not once, but twice. The year was 1902, and a group of miners were hard at work carving out new tunnels deep beneath the surface. Their dynamite had just exposed an old brick chamber. It was resealed with the original chains. The tunnel was filled in, and the chamber was buried once more beneath layers of stone. But someone had seen it. The diary was never published. It was quietly archived, but one photograph leaked, a page with a drawing, charcoal, trembling, frantic, the rectangle, the figure, arms up. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more. Scratching. But this time the figure was joined by another, a second one, smaller, both clawing at the same lid. Some say this means Margaretha is no longer alone, that something has changed, that her fate, once solitary, is now shared, that death, when disturbed, spreads like rot. A geologist named Richter, he documented it all in his diary, a faint clang, rhythmic, metallic. The guides dismiss it as plumbing, old pipes, settling stone. But those who linger late into the evening say it sounds like a bell. And if you press your ear close to the stone, you might hear more than that. You might hear fingernails, desperate, dull at first, but insistent, because the dead, you see, do not rest when buried in fear. And Margaretha Vos, the girl who was buried alive not once but twice, is still trying to escape the silence that the world forced upon her. She was a girl who never truly died. She was a warning carved into wood, scrawled in soot, remembered only when it is too late. So the next time you walk past a graveyard and hear the wind whistle through iron gates, listen closer, because if you hear a bell in the dark, it's already too late. She's awake, and she remembers you. His final entry written in a trembling hand. Told of the moment they left the chamber, he heard it clear as day. Like silver scraping a tombstone, a bell ringing. It was unmapped, dry and undisturbed, filled with an unsettling quiet inside. They found what looked like a shrine made of candles melted into bone, a cradle filled with black, feathers, and in the center, a lead casket chained tightly shut. There was no name on the surface, only an iron cross and the faint outline of a bell. It's a tale that comes to us from the Black Forest in Germany. But the youngest among them, a boy of just 17 summers, couldn't resist. He reached out and touched the lid. He never slept again. His mother later told the police that he began drawing the same image obsessively. A box, a figure with arms raised and palms red, always the same. He never spoke of what he saw, but the image haunted him. Now, the miners were a superstitious lot, meanwhile. The casket remained unopened. Margaretha became a myth, then a warning, then something older. Parents in old German villages would tell restless children, "Don't pretend to sleep too long or she'll come teach you how." But it was only in 1993 that the story returned with full force for decades. Stories like these rippled across Europe, chilling those who heard them. A restoration team working beneath a decommissioned cathedral in Strasbourg stumbled upon a cache of preserved letters tucked behind a false panel near the ossuary. Among them, bound in twine and stained with wax, was a diary, its author Sister Adela von Grun, the last surviving member of the convent that had once housed Margaretha. The pages were brittle but legible. Her final entries told of dark dreams, earth pressing on her chest, screams swallowed by soil, and a girl who watched her from behind her own eyelids. A girl whose breath no longer fogged the mirror, who didn't blink, didn't move, but somehow aged in reverse, becoming smaller, younger, until she was a child again, then a newborn, then a gasp, and then nothing. Her last written words were, "She is not waiting to be saved. She is waiting to be remembered." Buried twice but never laid to rest. Today, in a small chapel outside Wurzburg, tourists occasionally notice a sound coming from the crypt floor beneath the altar. Thank you for watching.